The time is just gone 16 minutes past 9 as we continue with the broadcast and the second hour of News and Views. Shortly, we'll be joined by the president of the African People's Convention, Themba Godi. We're talking about Nigeria and what has been playing out in Niger and the coup that had taken place. We also will be focusing on an update out of Rivoli this morning with regards to the Zamazamas, the informal settlements, and we've seen the hashtag Colored Lives Matter starting to feature more prominently as a result of what has been playing out in Rivoli in the last few days. And towards the end of the broadcast, our focus being Women's Month, August, women in the media. And this morning, we will be joined by Palestinian Gaza-based journalists and activists. We'll be joined by Sajud Shniwa this morning on at around 9:50 a.m. But before that, our focus is on what is playing out in Niger and Nigeria as well. And we've seen condemnations coming through as well with regard to reactionary acts by the Nigerian elite. There is all this talk about sanctions, but the Niger school leader has actually declared that he will not bow down to pressure to reinstate the deposed President Mohammed Bazoum. And this is General Abdurrahman Shiani, who has made these comments in a live televised address. And when we look at the regional bloc, they've imposed sanctions, severe economic sanctions on Niger and threatened to use force if the presidency is not restored by the 6th of August. So right now we're going across to be joined by Themba Godi, president of the African People's Convention. Themba, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Salam.
Yes, clearly, there are interesting developments with regard to the coup that has taken place in Niger, all this talk about sanctions, and I've seen some of your tweets where you've tweeted extensively on this issue. And let's just take a step back and in terms of your thoughts on what is actually playing out in Niger at this point in time, the coup, and also the international response to the coup.
Thanks very much for having me. Indeed, the developments out of Niger or West Africa are of great significance, not only to that part of the continent, but for the continent as a whole. What we see in Niger comes in the heels of what has happened in Mali, in Guinea, and Burkina Faso, where the military, tired of the formalism of elections that do not reflect the will of the people and that is not anchored in meeting the needs of the people, have acted. So what we see in Niger, it's in that context. And our view as the APC is that we always want to see the will of the people reflected and respected, but that the current crop of elected political leaders in Africa tend to pay allegiance more to investors than to ordinary people. And this frustration has led to what we have seen in Niger.
Well, definitely, and I think over the years, and I think the looking at the coup leader, who's made actually a statement saying that they refuse to give in to any threats, but again talking about interference in the internal affairs, and we've seen since colonization, and now that we see other agendas that have been playing out, these interferences have been there all the time, and to a large extent, the leadership of some of these countries like Niger, obviously need to take responsibility for what is playing out, because at the end of the day, it is about the people of the country, it is about the people, and sometimes they actually suffer unspeakable hardships and difficulties, and as a result, we see all this instability within these countries.
No, indeed. I think that the leaders of ECOWAS, led by Nigeria, the AU, and even the Western countries, must answer to the question or the issue raised by one of the demonstrators in a video circulating on social media, where he said, in Niger, we have oil, we have diamonds, we have gold, we have uranium, but we live like slaves. We live like slaves. I think for me, that is a fundamental statement, because it then puts into context everything that is happening. So when you blindly say restore Bazoum, you are saying restore the slave conditions under which the people were living, with their resources being looted by France. And I think that is morally and politically unacceptable. For me, the issue of whether you have a coup or not in itself is meaningless unless the content and the intent of that coup puts the interests of the people at the center. Then that's what gives it meaning. So are elections. You can have elections, the formalism of elections, but if those that are supposedly elected do not reflect the will of the people, it is a meaningless exercise. And I think that is the challenge we have around issues of so-called democracy, which is actually the democracy of the rich, to say to what extent does it respond and represent the interests of the ordinary people who are participants to this process. Look at what's happening in Senegal right now. You have the leader of the opposition who has Pan-Africanist outlook being charged. He has been sentenced to 2 years in prison, but the government is refusing to take him to prison. What does that tell you? It tells you that all of this is just manipulation of processes.
Yes, and also looking at some of the recent developments and the whole issue surrounding sanctions. And I've seen your tweet with regard to Progressive Africa condemning the reactionary act by the Nigerian elite, talking about sanctions and sanctions, the impact that it's going to have on ordinary people. That again, with the hope of revolting against their government, and these are major concerns, Themba.
No, very true. I'm sure you would have noted that by now Nigeria has cut off electricity supply to Niger. And they now have their own version of electricity blackouts like we're having, but far much worse. Who suffers? Is it the military leadership that suffers, or is it ordinary people who suffer? Firstly, from not having access to electricity, and secondly, in terms of the functioning of industry and its impact on the economy, its impact on the on the employment of ordinary people. So sanctions, it's a cruel, blunt instrument that is not targeted on those that you are fighting against. You end up fighting the entire country. Like we understand now, there are trade sanctions, there are also financial sanctions from ECOWAS. Who is going to suffer? It is the ordinary people of Niger. We were thankful that countries like Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, Algeria, and I think to some extent even Libya have said no, we don't accept external intervention. I'm sure they should be able to assist the government there. I think what we need is to say what are the lessons we're picking up from these coups, because all of them decry one thing: the deteriorating economic and social conditions in those countries that those that are elected are unable to arrest.
Well, definitely. And also, I think, you are talking about external factors, and one cannot rule out the former colonialists. And we know central to this is France as well. And, the question that is being raised is why would Nigeria even want to actually please France? But also at the same time, looking at other powers, looking at the United States, for instance. And we know that obviously the US intelligence featuring very, very prominently in the country in terms of surveillance, in terms of drone base, and all of this at the end of the day is there, and all of it is playing out in terms of external influence and also external interference.
I can tell you this: duplicity seems to be an integral part of the intellectual arsenal of the Western world. Look at Ukraine. They're talking about sovereignty. But what about Palestine? Not even a word comes out of it. When the coup happened in Ukraine in 2014, it was actually engineered by the same countries. But when there's a coup in Niger, suddenly they are all against, all against coups. We know that America has a huge military base in Niger, constructed at the cost of more than $100 million, which is used for surveillance purposes in the entire region. France, we understand that 1 out of every 3 bulbs in France are lit using the uranium that comes from Niger. So it is all about their own interest. It has nothing to do with the Nigerian people. It is not about the citizens of Niger. It is about their own colonial interests, what they get out of Niger, not what will benefit the people. So as for Nigeria, well, look, we just have to understand the elite in Nigeria, the kind of people they are, the kind of politics that they push, their kind of orientation, to understand why they take this particular stance. You'll even see the press conference held by ECOWAS after their first meeting. There was some level of, I would say, recklessness or excitement that spoke in very impatient terms about we give you 1 week. And you could see that they're doing it for an external audience, and not so much to say, but what is our context? What are the dynamics? What is it that we need to? I mean, they sent the president of Chad to go and negotiate, somebody who came through a coup himself. What is it about Niger that makes them so impatient and so disparate to reverse the process? I mean, look, General Tian has just made a statement that whenever they saw or identified or located terrorists, and they told Bazoumi that they want to attack them, the then president would say, no, consult France. Let's consult France first. I don't think there's any worse example. So is that the person that you want to bring back into position of leadership in the country? To serve what purpose? I mean, the former finance minister was crying in the public space when the army said, account to us about the use of public funds within 48 hours. He was crying. Why? Why was he crying? Because he knows that they've just been looting, enriching themselves at the expense of the Nigerian people. They were not there to serve the people. For us as the APC, the fundamental question is, where do you stand vis-a-vis the interests of the people? If you stand against the interests of the people, it doesn't matter whether you were elected in a manipulated election or not.
Yes. Also, Themba, the duplicity and the hypocrisy that you speak of these governments, these Western governments and governments like France and the United States of America. And it's not only limited to governments, it's also limited to some of the institutions. Now we've seen even the likes of the World Bank making a statement, issuing threats and talking about suspending disbursements to Niger until further notice. So it's, it's a vicious circle that we are seeing in terms of how they have actually reacted to this coup.
No, very true. Of course, Western governments do not only use their political spokespersons and their military, but they use all the institutions at their disposal. Your World Bank, your IMF, your United Nations, and all that kind of stuff. And until we have the consolidation of the multipolar world, where all nations will be treated equally, this hypocrisy will continue. And we can only wish strength to countries like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Algeria, who are taking a very principled stand that we want to be independent, we want to be free. And until that happens, the hypocrisy of the Western world, will continue to inform public discourse. Look at their media, and it's so important that the alternative media, which should actually become mainstream media for us, and your likes of the CNN and your BBC should be alternative media because they represent the elite and not necessarily the people. We need so that people are informed properly and not fed a narrative that will seek to hide the hypocrisy that I'm talking about. I mean, France, when there were riots in Iran, the French president said, well, look, it's about the people. And when there were riots in France after the murder of that young boy, he said, no, these riots are out of order, and social media was suspended. So the hypocrisy shows itself on a daily basis on a variety of issues. This one of Niger is just but one, but that's why I said hypocrisy seems to be in the DNA of the Western intellectual world.
Yes, interesting you speak of the media, and this is the reason why Salam Media, we actually push ourselves as humanitarian journalism, and which is basically a strong principle that we actually subscribe to, because this is exactly what it is. It is about human beings, it's about humanitarian issues right across the entire world, and truth needs to be told, and the truth, obviously, and obviously at the same time, expose all the hypocrisy and the duplicity that you actually speak of, Temba. But just coming back to this issue, looking at the AU, the African Union, do you think the African Union has a role to play here?
Well, somebody raised the question, what was the role of the AU when Libya was invaded, when Gaddafi was murdered? Its role was dictated to by the European Union. Remember what the president of Uganda said a few weeks back, that 6 African head of states were mandated by the AU to go to Libya to negotiate a settlement. But they were turned back by NATO. NATO told them, don't go, and they didn't go. And now we have seen the statements from the AU condemning Niger. And one can only assume that they are doing this because they've been allowed to say so by their masters. And of course, their statements are in line with those of their masters. I think the current leadership crop in Africa lacks context on everything that happens. And they are more interested in form than in substance content, meaning, are we able to look at our condition and situation in Africa, analyze it, understand its nuances, and then formulate a position based on the realities that exist out there? Can we say because Bazoum was elected, did he serve the interests of the Nigerians? The answer is no. And for me, the response of the African Union must always be informed by what is in the best interest of the people. But like I said, I think a good number of them are sponsored in their elections by imperialist forces to serve their interests, and therefore they will always dance to their tune.
Well, Temba, we're going to have to leave it at that. I know we could engage a lot more. This is a massive topic, actually. There's just so much apart from just Niger, but just looking at the African continent as a whole in terms of where we are as a continent, the leadership, and all the other issues that we have been talking about. But for now, we thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out, talking to us right here on Salam Media. All the best to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Themba Godi, president of the African People's Convention, with us this morning. We're going to go for a break. We come back. We're going to provide you an update out of Rivoli this morning.